sometimes back to these parts of us, right, that come in over time to help and try and protect us. They're not all bad. Like they help
Mm.
us in a lot of ways achieve things, maybe make connections, experience things we wouldn't have otherwise experienced. But then there's a threshold, right? There's an optimal level of these things, right? An optimal level of perfection, an optimal level of, which is not even really perfection, right? But an optimal level of, because a perfectionist would say, no, it's never enough. It
Yes.
needs to be just so.
Yes.
Yeah, but like these things in a specific dose are great, but
Mm.
it's a trauma response when it's way too much or not enough.
Right now, a lot of us are running, not from anything obvious, not from danger, just running, checking the boxes, hitting the goals, keeping up the pace. And somewhere in the back of our minds, we know that if we slow down long enough to actually feel something, it might all catch up to us. So we keep going and we call it productivity. We call it drive. We call it ambition. But sometimes it is none of those things. Hey, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Vibe with Kai podcast. It's your boy, Kai. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Kirsten Davidson, a registered psychotherapist and the founder of Mind The Gaps Psychotherapy, where she works with adults and couples and families navigating disconnection, emotional overwhelm, and the patterns that keep pulling them back into the same cycles. Her approach is rooted in internal family systems, relational therapy, and trauma-informed care. And what sets her apart is that she doesn't just treat the symptom. She goes looking for what created it. Kirsten also writes for Psychology Today, exploring identity, relationships, and what it actually means to grow. You can find all of her work and booking information in the show notes of this episode. In this conversation, we got into the neurology of autopilot living and how high achievement can be disguised as a trauma response, and the difference between shame and accountability, and what it looks like to build a life that is actually self-led rather than just well-managed. So if you've ever wondered why doing everything right still feels exhausting, this episode is for you. Before we get into it, if you want to go deeper into this community, subscribe on Patreon or Facebook for only $5 a month. You get access to the exclusive ADHD deep dive library, behind the scenes content, there we go, that you will not find anywhere else, and the Reverse the Mic segment, where my guest today turns the tables and puts me in the hot seat, asking me questions that open up a side of me that I do not show often. All of those links are also in the show notes. With that said, my friends, sit back, relax, and enjoy my chat with the remarkably grounded Kirsten Davidson. My friends, I am sitting here with Kirsten Davidson. So happy to be sitting and chatting with you. I want to start with a quote that I know you love, and it's from Glennon Doyle. And that quote is, "Destruction is essential for construction. If we want to build the new, we must be willing to let the old burn." And I love that quote so much. How does the idea of letting the old burn define the work that you do with Mind the Gaps Psychotherapy?
Yeah. Oh, I love that you started with that. And thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me on. Yeah, that is
Yeah.
one of my absolute favorite quotes. And I think it absolutely sums up what therapy means, at least what therapy means to me and my clients, which is being willing and open to let go of what we think we know about ourselves, about the world, about other people. And so that's kind of the letting the old burn, if you will, like
Mm.
being open to kind of emerge from the ashes, right? And
Yeah.
you're anew, and you're just ready for different ways of thinking and being.
Yeah. Yeah. When you sit with a new client, or when a new client sits down with you, like, you've done this for a while, and I'm curious, what's the hardest part for them to burn or let go of? Is there like any similarities that you see over time?
Yeah, I think the hardest things for people to let go of, myself included, are those beliefs that really define who we are,
Sure.
things that we link with identity. If
Mm.
someone is very, very linked to, say, being anxious, right, or linked
Mhm.
to a certain political view, or linked to um, a certain way they take care of themselves, and if this is something that really defines them, whether they know it or not, that can be really difficult for them to kind of shake loose a little bit because that can
Yeah.
feel like an identity threat.
Right. Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah.
I have never heard the term identity theft before, which I think is great. Can you talk a little bit more about that? That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, identity theft is this I would say that in the work, it's this feeling and this fear, that
Yeah.
can come from exploring the vastness in my work, exploring the gaps, right? The spaces
Yeah, yeah,
between
yeah.
what we think we know and what we might come to learn and who we're becoming,
Yeah.
and it can feel like we're being robbed of who we are, so it can actually
Mm.
first feel a bit jarring and even a bit uncomfortable. So that's also what I name a lot
Yeah.
in the work is therapy isn't always, warm fuzzies. If anything, it is hard work. Like it takes
Mhm.
a lot of bravery to say I'm willing to um, look at things with fresh eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because like, often when you hear the term, like, identity theft, like, you usually think of, like, "Oh, my credit card was stolen," or,
Of
and
course,
things
of
like that.
course.
But from a mental health standpoint, it's really interesting to think of it, from that standpoint. And in your one of your writings for Psychology Today, you I realize you talk a lot about moving from an autopilot state of conscious, like a self-led life, or autopilot status to a conscious, like self-led life. And for
Hmm.
someone who feels like they're just surviving day to day, because I know there's a lot of people that are watching and listening right now that really just are surviving day to day, and they have this overwhelmed brain. And I want to take a moment to address them for a second. For those people that are surviving day to day and they're feeling overwhelmed, how do you define a self-led life? How does that actually look in practice?
Self led, not to get too big with it, but it does come from this theory that I use a lot in my work, which is
Mm,
called internal family systems. And it focuses on how I'll use this metaphor like we come into this world as a son. Right. We're born into this world with, the state of consciousness that allows us to be curious and creative and courageous. And over time, different parts of us come in and they look at these
sure.
parts as clouds. So they might get in the way of the sun. We might even forget that we inherently are that sun. And being self-led means coming back to that natural state of
Mm,
being that light, that beacon. And so living self-led means getting to know these cloudy parts of
sure.
us and hopefully helping them part. And so I know that's very kind of theoretical. What does it look like in practice?
Hmm.
I'm biased, but, working with a therapist to help you get to know those
Hmm.
clouds and noticing them parting is massive.
Yeah. Yeah, I will always, always, always be a big proponent of working with a mental health professional, especially I just made a video about this recently because I know that there's a lot of people that either follow me or follow other content creators. They'll just kind of self-diagnose themselves for many reasons. Maybe it's just not affordable for them to go to a therapist or see a doctor, whatever it may be. But I always recommend that they find a way, because I feel like therapists have like this 30,000 foot view that they're able to help you with this. Because I think as people are sitting here listening to us talk about this, like leading a self-led life and trying to not be on autopilot, a lot of people will think that they have to figure out on their own, but
Mhm.
that's not something they have to figure out on their own. So like when somebody comes to you and they come to you with this problem, how what's like the first step that they should take when they feel as though they are stuck in, I guess, this rut, this like ongoing cycle of like screaming into your pillow every morning?
Yeah, I think I love that. I think noticing what parts are most prominent, parts just being
Yeah.
emotions, is so important. So it's the whole, we have to recognize there's a concern in order to face it, in order to release us and unburden us
Yeah.
from that. So the first thing people would be, asked to do is practice a little bit more mindful awareness around what is it that is
Mm.
surrounding that screaming into the pillow experience, right? Where
Yeah.
what is that anger, right? Without any judgment. So there's a lot of mindfulness in the work that I do, which is noticing without judgment. And I think that
Mm.
without judgment part gets missed a lot in the social media jargon we hear around mindfulness. It's not just paying
Yeah.
attention. Yeah, it's paying attention with that openness, curious mind instead of a judgmental mind. So yeah,
Yeah.
so much. I use that term all the time. Like, get curious. Let's get curious about what's coming up
Yeah.
for you right now, and just be open to understanding what is the anger here to do for you? What's it
Mhm.
trying to help you with right now? Then
Right.
we get to know these emotions a little bit deeper than just labeling any type of uncomfortable emotion as bad, because they're always
Right,
trying to
right.
help in some way.
Sure, sure. I wanna go back to the autopilot side of things because I know
Mhm.
that that's a word that I quite often hear from my audience as well. What's the first biological or emotional indicator that someone is operating entirely on autopilot?
Oh, I like that you ask about the biological piece too. So
Yeah.
emotionally, how do we know someone's on autopilot? They're not really tuning into what's happening in their day to day. They are going through the motions, same with when we're
Mm.
driving a car and we get from one place to another and we have no idea how we got there because
Like,
we were so,
how did I
yeah,
get here? Yeah.
yeah, we were so in our head about other stuff. So it's a
Yeah.
it's a it's a state where we're really lacking presence. We're just going
Mm.
through without actually pausing to notice what each experience is like for us throughout the day.
Sure.
And that can leave people feeling dejected and depleted and even depressed, right? Because we feel that
Yeah.
things are just the same all the time. And on a neurological level, what's happening is in our minds, in our brains specifically, the neurosynaptic patterns are just on loop. Like literally that you're following the same, imagine following the same trail of neurons throughout your
Mhm.
brain every day. And of course, we're not thinking about that all the time, but that's what's
Yeah.
happening. And so when we have experiences that shift our state of consciousness, whether that be in therapy, whether that be with plant medicine, whether that be through a moment of awe where all of a sudden you're shaken out of that autopilot state, you're actually creating and carving a new neural pathway.
Yeah. One of the things I really appreciate about the work that you do is a lot of your approach involves shifting away from just treating symptoms, and it shifts it to looking at a deeper lived experience, which I really appreciate. And one of the books that you mentioned was the book Lost Connections by Johan Ari, and you said that how that's a major turning point for you. For the people that are not familiar with that book, what is that book, and how did it change your perspective about mental health to understanding it, like from I guess pathologizing it into simply understanding it contextually?
Yeah, Lost Connections was a huge pivot for me when I read that book. I was
Hmm.
potentially going to go into graduate school and to do my PhD in clinical psychology. And clinical is focusing more on those traditional medical models of psychology, rather. I took a psychotherapy route, which is considering it more holistically. But needless to say, when I read that book, it just changed everything I thought I knew about what is depression and about the whole serotonin depletion, dopamine depletion hypothesis. And it kind of debunks everything, including how
Sure.
a lot of SSRIs are not actually doing much and how the placebo effect is even more powerful to
Hmm.
take sugar pills, right? Believing that it's going to do something instead of these medications. So the long and the short of the book is what are the real causes of depression? Disconnection, lost
Hmm.
connections, right? And how
Yeah.
when we think like you said earlier, if we think we need to do it all ourselves and we don't open up to people and we don't work with people in combination, who are also experiencing these things, we're not going to get out of the state that we're in. So
Right.
what it did was it drew me away from looking at just the individual as having a quote unquote problem, as there being something defective with them or
Hmm.
having a, as you've heard, probably this chemical imbalance to wait a
Yeah.
second, why is that even happening? Like, yes, there's an imbalance in the brain, but that didn't just happen. That actually came from this, and this. And all of those
Right.
factors are mostly related to being disconnected from others, disconnected from yourself, right? It's kind of like looking at someone with, let's say, a cut on their leg and not asking them how that happened and thinking "Oh, they're broken, like they're
Mm.
bruised and they're cut. It's like, well, they fell 10 minutes ago. So that context, like it's that simple that we weren't historically really looking at context when we're thinking about diagnostics and it's a I would say diagnostics are a very like feeble and well-intentioned attempt at helping us,
Sure.
move through mental health concerns, but a lot of the time we miss that context.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that we understand the difference between fixing symptoms and understanding the context behind them, I want to talk about why those patterns get so deeply rooted in the first place, right? So
I talk on my platform very openly about my late diagnosis with ADHD, and how for a long time I was I was just rewiring my survival patterns to mask what I was actually going through. And it was freaking exhausting. It was so
Mhm.
exhausting. When you work with high achievers specifically, how often are their successes actually just well disguised trauma responses?
Oh my gosh, I love this one. I would say
Yeah.
so much of the time.
Yeah.
So much of the time. I'll even myself putting myself in the hot seat here, that
Yeah.
I can resonate with that, that before doing a lot of the work, there's a big perfectionistic part of me
Yeah.
that helped me in a lot of ways, but was also hindering me in a lot of ways. So yes, in my work with clients and what I've witnessed and experienced, sometimes these back to these parts of us, right, that come in over time to help and try and protect us. They're not all bad. Like they help
Mm.
us in a lot of ways achieve things, maybe make connections, experience things we wouldn't have otherwise experiences. But then there's a threshold, right? There's an optimal level of ththese things, right? An optimal level of perfection, an optimal level of, which is not even really perfection, right? But an optimal level of, because a perfectionist would say, no, it's never enough. It
Yes.
needs to be just so.
Yes.
Yeah. But like these things in a specific dose are great, but
Mm.
it's a trauma response when it's way too much or not enough of a certain
Yeah.
emotion. And yeah, so it's kind of working with how can we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? How do we still
Right.
keep these parts that really help drive you and you're motivated and you want to get stuff done? And how do we set it down for a minute and just be?
Right. How can someone tell the difference between healthy ambition and a biological trauma response?
I think, we would categorize something as a trauma response in a way that is harmful or hurtful.
Mm,
So this is when ambition, if it's now getting in the way of your sleep, if it's now getting in the way of your ability to take care of
right.
yourself, your others in your life, your relationships with people, if whatever it is you are so dead set on is now interfering quite significantly with all of those other aspects of your life, that's when we'd say, okay, like this trauma response is maybe a little bit too powerful. We've maybe given a bit
Mm,
too much leeway to this part of you and we want to rein it in a bit. We don't want to let go of it altogether. And that's usually the fear is, well, if I don't do everything 100%, then I can't do it at all.
yeah.
So the
Right.
work is how can we still give it that really like passionate oomph in the work that you're doing, but also rein it in so that you're not losing out on all these other beautiful parts of your life.
Yeah. You just mentioned relationships, which is something I want to dive into, because we hear the phrase intergenerational trauma. We hear that a lot online,
Mhm.
especially on social media. In your practice, how do you help clients, I guess, recognize that the relationship patterns that they're stuck in might not even belong to them originally?
Mm, yeah, I like that you say they might not belong to them because
Yeah.
that's what we call a legacy burden, is
Mm,
something that has come before us and that we are repeating, but it did not originate from us. Sometimes it does, like sometimes it's our direct lived experience, but sometimes it's what our parents experienced or even
mm,
what our grandparents experienced. And so that also requires that mindful awareness and curiosity around why is it that I'm choosing this path? Why is it that I'm living out this tradition or, adopting a certain role in a relationship? Is this what I've been taught? Is this what I've just accepted as normal? So it comes back to
mhm.
that shaking out of autopilot and being open to new roles and new values and
Yeah.
beliefs.
Yeah, I wonder, is there a physical sensation, or I guess an obvious emotional shift when you're able to recognize a generational cycle is breaking, like, in real time? Is there like a physical sensation that you can feel when that happens?
100%.
Oh,
100%. I
amazing,
think,
amazing.
yeah. And I think that, and this is me speaking for myself and also what I've witnessed and heard from clients.
Yeah,
And what we see is like a physical lightness that seems to be the main reported experience is I didn't realize how heavy this was on my shoulders. And I
right.
literally feel lighter, even
Mm,
just noticing without even doing the work on how do we fully unburden you from this legacy, just noticing it. It's like, this wasn't me. This was someone else or something else, and
Yeah.
it never belonged to me.
Right. You help people navigate disconnection through your clinical work and in your public writing as well. When a family or a couple comes to you feeling completely stuck in this reactive loop, what's the very first thing that they can do to interrupt that cycle?
Reactivity versus responding is so
Mhm.
huge in
Sure.
the conversations we have. So how do we notice a reaction? Well, usually it's retrospectively in a family, right? Everyone might have their little
Mhm.
moment or tantrum or freak out, and then
Mhm.
retrospectively they're like, yeah, maybe I was just reacting on
Mhm.
autopilot to that instead of taking a beat, getting curious, being intentional, right? It's not going to go
Mhm.
perfectly, but
Yeah.
as soon as when we get a bit more comfortable with the emotions that we notice showing up on repeat, we can say, I'm seeing anger again in myself, or
Mhm.
I'm seeing anger in my sibling or my parent. And how can we slow down? So
Yeah.
I say that all the time. We need to slow down in conversation. We tend to operate very quickly, which is also a product of culture. How do we just take it down? Like if it's turned up to 10, take it down to 5. How do we
Mhm.
just notice, we're
Yeah.
safe right now? And I understand that's not the case for everyone, but when there is safety, right? How do we also bring emotional safety to the conversation? That's taking a beat.
Yeah, that's really hard for me to slow down. I'm from the Northeast of the US, so like Philly, New York, Boston, Baltimore, DC. Like we're just fast paced by nature. But I think that goes back to what you were talking about, how like from a cultural standpoint, it's different for each person. But as you were talking, the phrase that popped up into my head as you were talking was internal family systems, right? Like a big part of your therapeutic approach involves internal family systems. For the listeners who are not familiar, how does viewing our minds as a collection of different, quote, parts change the way that we handle the emotional overwhelm?
I would say the main point there is when we view ourselves as multiples,
Mm,
as not one with our emotions, rather we are just experiencing our emotions, we can feel more empowered and also a bit more in control. So I'll
mm,
just give you an example, when we're tuning in to someone who's saying they're feeling anxious, I invite them to imagine anxiety as as you say, quote unquote, part of them. And
mhm,
if anxiety can just be a part of them, like a fragmented piece of them rather than all of them, the language starts to change from I'm an
mhm,
anxious person to I have a part of me that's anxious and I can sit, in quotation, sit with that anxious part. Notice it. Where does it show up in your body? Usually it's in your chest. It's different for everyone, but that kind of heart fluttering or that feeling of like your stomach dropping through your butt, like just this like
mhm,
intense kind of shock
mhm.
response. And
Sure.
that awareness to it, even again, even without doing the work yet, just noticing it as a part, there's separation, there's control, there can be a bit of a sigh of relief that, oh, wow, this
Mhm,
isn't all of me. This is
mhm,
just a part. And this part came online, if you will, years and years and years ago, usually under the age of 10. Like this tends to be a trauma response back to what we were talking about before. So this part, anxiety came on to help this person at one point, and they're still hanging on, right?
mhm.
Probably worried that if they weren't in the person's system, that something bad would happen to them. So we just want to get
Yeah.
to know this anxious part in this example.
Right. Is that in that example, is that a time when understanding a protective part completely shifts potentially like a client's or a person's ability to heal? Is that
Yes.
an example of that? Okay.
100%. So this would be
Yeah.
the initial, we'd call it building a self to part relationship.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
as we build that relationship, hopefully over time, when this part becomes more comfortable and trusts us a bit more, we can help
Mhm.
unburden it from the role that it's been trapped in. Generally, the founder of IFS, Richard Schwartz, just states that parts are, you know, children, like child versions of us that were put in adult roles. So we want to find those parts, understand them, and burden them from that role and give them a new role. Most often when we
Mhm.
connect with these parts and they're open to a new role and we say like, what would you rather be doing in Kai's system, for example?
Right.
They'll
Right.
say they'll usually say like, I just want to play or I want to take
Yeah.
a nap.
Yeah.
because I'm so
Very
tired of
true.
working so hard.
I do want to take a nap. I want to
Yeah,
take a
there you
nap.
go. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I've seen it mentioned that something that you've said, that we have this genuine vulnerability and honest self acceptance, and how it's so incredibly hard to get there. Why do we fight so hard against accepting ourselves, even when we know it's the path forward? Why do we fight so hard against that?
I would say one of the number one drivers for self-abandonment, so not tuning into who we really are, is the desire to be liked, to be loved, to fit
Mm,
in. And when we believe, likely because of past experiences or what we've witnessed happen to others, if we believe that our true self is too different from the in group, then it will be really hard for us to lean into that because we will probably
yeah.
worry that we'll be alone.
Interesting. Does our biology try to protect us from being vulnerable with the people we love?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's a good question. Like from an evolutionary
Yeah.
standpoint, we are definitely programmed to be in connection to other people.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the way, though, we get this idea that we won't have true connection if we're our full selves, because that will either be too much or too little for the people around us. What we see, though, when people do work through those blocks and those narratives is the more authentic you are, the deeper the connections are with the people who are actually ready to receive you for you.
Mhm.
So I would say, biologically, we're programmed to be social and to be connected, but it's
Mhm.
not in our biology to hide who we are. That's a trauma response.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a lot of courage to admit when we are part of our own healing obstacles, right? Like in our self
Mhm.
reflection, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage to admit that. When you're speaking with your clients, when you're speaking with people, how do you gently guide someone to, I guess, take that personal accountability without letting them spiral into shame? Because sometimes I feel as though that's the route that we go when we're having to admit that we're in our own way sometimes. How do you help someone take personal accountability without letting them spiral into the shame aspect of it?
Mhm. Bringing it back to parts. So
Yeah.
when we can acknowledge that a part of us, still us, but a part of us, not all of us, not this self sunshine energy, rather like the clouds that have come in, those are the parts that are blocking us from being authentic or from doing the next right thing. There tends to be this dissolution of shame because we're recognizing it as a piece of us rather than our core, like our nature, who we
Mm,
truly are. So we might have parts that think that we're a bad person or that we're lazy or we're lame or we're stupid, and
mhm,
we tend to mistake those parts for us, and we think, oh, I guess that's my natural state. But then again, when we get to know that no, these are just experiences that have turned into self-like parts, we call them,
mm,
then we can, not that we're blaming it on the part, we're understanding it, we're validating why it's doing what it's doing. But yeah, but you're right, a big part of the work is getting to know the parts that get in the way. Almost
yeah,
all of them get in the way, but there's no bad parts, as the
yeah,
founder would say. None of them are bad, none of them are malicious. They're
yeah.
trying, they're usually just doing a pretty bad job, so we wanna help
Sure.
them out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I always want to make sure that people have some actionable items, and whenever I'm talking with an expert like you, because you are able to provide some insight that people may not have had the opportunity for. So I want to ask some questions that some that provide some actionable items that people can have as soon as they're done listening to our conversation today. Recognizing everything that we just talked about is super messy. Protecting our habits, it's heavy lifting, but I think that the real magic comes from, and this is just my opinion, when we start to apply some of these insights into our daily routine every day, because I
Mhm.
think it just takes time to really get ourselves in the flow. It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
So if someone is listening and realizes that they are stuck in this reactive habit with maybe either their partner or their kids. A lot of parents listen to this podcast. What is one immediate grounding technique that they can use to step back into a conscious state?
Grounding, when we talk about grounding, I always think of sensory grounding, and this is
Mhm.
a very tangible, accessible, free tool for everyone. So
Mhm.
sensory grounding is first of all, it does require us to notice that a
Mhm.
strong emotion is present, but we're usually pretty good at that. Like when we feel
Mhm.
angry, we feel it.
Yeah.
And or when we feel sad, we're feeling it, right? So how to ground back into our natural state. Sensory grounding can look like noticing three things that you feel around you. So that might be, what is the sensation on the bottom of your feet touching the
Mm.
floor right now? That's usually something we do not think about, right? Or
Yeah.
what's the feeling of my hands on either each other, right? You can do hand rubbing to conduct some heat and energy, or hands on your legs, right? Like, what does that feel like? Or
Mhm.
if you're wearing a fuzzy sweater, also things that you can smell if there are strong smells around you. And
Yeah.
yeah, just touching on any of the senses and getting curious about what's it like to be in this specific moment in
Mhm.
time right now as me. What am I touching, hearing, tasting, smelling, feeling, right?
Mhm.
All of those things. So
Yeah.
that's one very kind of like blanket statement, simple way to bring yourself back to like
It's
what's it like to be
great
right
though.
here.
I love that because I literally just put that into practice fairly recently because I was out to dinner with some friends and I needed to ground myself because there was just a lot going on and I was feeling a little overstimulated and I had a cold glass of water and I just focused on the feeling of the water in my hand and like the condensation and how it felt, on my skin and as the condensation was like dripping down, like I was just I focused on that and it grounded me like within a couple minutes or so. Like when somebody does take this kind of pause, does it typically take a couple minutes sometimes? I know it's going to be different for everybody, but when you take that intentional pause, is it usually a couple minutes that it takes to kind of bring you back into that conscious state?
Yeah, I would definitely caution that it's not an instant fix because I think a lot of
Right.
people are, myself included, will be impatient of like, why isn't this
Yeah.
working right now?
Yeah. Story of
But
my life.
yeah, I think a lot of it comes from being intentional with it. So if when you're
Mhm.
noticing the strong emotion, whatever it is, and then you're about to do a grounding technique, also just
Mhm.
saying to yourself, whether internally, or out loud, like, my intention is to shift my state. That's the
Mm.
intention with whatever
Yeah.
action we're doing. So I love the cold water one. It makes me think of putting an
Mhm.
ice cube to your wrist or to the back of your neck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these are physical experiences that are designed to shift our mental state. And if that's the only goal we have, you'll achieve it faster.
Right, right. You're all about making self-understandable or self-understanding relatable and achievable. So what's a daily habit or practice that you recommend for someone who wants to start exploring their own internal family systems without feeling completely overwhelmed?
Yeah. It's good to name that it could be
Yeah.
overwhelming if it's taken on as something that someone can do themselves. So I like to always say, even as a therapist, I don't do internal family systems on myself. I sit with my own
Mhm.
therapist because it's important to do it in connection. But little
Yeah.
things that we can do by ourselves is just starting to practice that mindful awareness of emotions as parts of you. So if
Mhm.
next time you feel a strong emotion, if it feels safe to say, well, I'm noticing anger, right? Or I'm noticing anxiety. Where do I feel that in my body? Right? You can
Mhm.
just ask yourself that and see if it reveals itself to you anywhere. This is a question that might be weird for a lot of people. Like, when was the last time someone asked you where you feel an emotion in
Mm.
your body? I'm so desensitized to it because of the work that
Mhm.
I do. But
Sure.
oftentimes we'll get like,
Yeah.
oh, I've never thought of that. Okay, great. Now that's
Yeah.
a grounding practice. So where do you feel it in your physical body? And then just
Yeah.
asking yourself, how do you feel towards that emotion right now? So it becomes very
Mhm.
meta, not just what does the emotion feel like, but now how do you feel towards it?
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's frustration, right? Or there might be
Mhm.
fear. Our goal in therapy is to get to a place of gratitude so that we can help that part release its energy. But just that mindful awareness around where's the emotion is a part of me, the emotion is not all of me. Right away, we usually see some softening of whatever the emotion
Right.
is because it's being witnessed by you rather than embodied by you.
Mhm. Yeah. If anybody is watching or listening right now and they're like, "Oh, I like this Kirsten person," I have all of your links are going to be in the show notes of this episode. So anybody can, that's interested in reading some of your insight or, even potentially booking a session with you, all of that information will be in there. And
Awesome.
since you work with a lot of these people, is there like standard homework, like assignments that you typically give your clients to help them, I guess, stay accountable in between sessions with you?
Yeah, I think homework is I almost don't even wanna call it homework because I don't want it to ever feel to a client like we're, like, overwhelming their system even more.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
truly, the answer I just gave about that mindful awareness of parts, that's a
Mhm.
common one. We could say that's some
Mhm.
homework, is just starting to practice that self-to-part relationship building, and that's pretty low
Yeah.
stakes because we also wanna make sure that things aren't being uncovered if someone feels that that would
Mm.
be too much emotionally for them to take on without that partnership.
Yeah. We know that one fixed feature of being human is our ability to change. How do you recommend people celebrate those small incremental changes so that they don't lose that momentum?
I love this. Talking about it
Yeah.
with loved ones, with trusted, safe people can
Mhm.
really help to solidify, like, "Hey, I did that. I had this win today, whether it feels
Mhm.
big or small. I wanna tell you about it, and I wanna make these wins happen more often." Great. Now you have this accountability partner. If that feels like too much and maybe you're not ready for that yet, journaling about it and coming back to that journal prompt can be helpful, or even creating a mantra around, like, what is it that you
Mhm.
did today that helped you step outside of your comfort zone? How can we come back to that? How can you re-empower yourself?
Yeah. I think taking those small steps is exactly how that's how we build like the new version of us. So I appreciate you providing that. And I want to play a little game with you, Kirsten.
Oh, yeah.
It's called This or That.
Okay.
And what I do is I give you two choices, and you just have to pick one or the other, or none, or both, whatever it may be. It is not deep, I promise you. I always tell people don't
Okay.
overthink it, you can either pick one or just give your insight on it from your perspective. Okay, sound good?
Okay, great. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, first one: reading a dense psychology textbook or writing a new piece of poetry.
Writing a new piece of poetry, 100%.
Yeah, tell me about that. Tell me about the poetry.
Yeah, so this is vulnerable. This is the first time I'm talking about this on a
Oh, I
podcast.
love it. Exclusive.
Yeah, this is exclusive. So I do write poetry every morning,
Mhm,
and this is something that I started doing a couple months ago just for me as a way
mhm,
to as kind of an alternate to journaling and to
mhm.
be able to express myself creatively, not for the eyes of others, but just for me. But as I've started to work on it a little bit more, I'm thinking, if I've been writing one every day for a year, there might be a book there. So this is
Yeah,
something that's now potentially turning into a bigger project, and I love the psychology books. I do. I read a
yeah.
lot of self-help and do a lot of research, but there's something about being in that creative flow
Mhm.
that I will always choose.
I love it. A second one, a completely silent morning routine or a morning filled with loud music and movement.
Both,
Both.
both. Somehow both, because I love to have my quiet time, just me, but then part of that is also, like, blasting music in my apartment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that. I do that all the time. That was me this
Yeah.
morning. Like legit,
Yeah.
literally.
Same.
Next one, tackling a difficult conversation via text message or thrashing it out over a phone call.
In person,
That's fair.
but
I think that's
also
fair.
also phone call 100%. Yeah, texting gets
Yeah, over
way too
texting.
messy, way too
Mhm.
messy. Yeah, phone call all
Yeah,
day.
and it's hard to judge like tone and intent sometimes
Mhm.
because like you kind of leave it up to the other person to fully understand what the intention was or how you said it, and things like that. So
Exactly.
it could be misinterpreted very easily. So I'm with you there.
Mhm.
Number 4, attending a massive network of I'm gonna try that one again. Here we go. Attending a massive networking event or having a deep conversation with one stranger at a coffee shop.
I love both of those for different reasons. I'm gonna
Yeah.
choose both because I do
Okay.
love the energy and vibration of, like, a big networking event where you're connecting
Yeah.
and you're meeting new people and there's just this synergy there. But
Mhm.
then there's also something very, like, quietly beautiful about having a
Yeah.
one-to-one moment with a
Mhm.
stranger, so I've gotta say both for that one.
Yeah, it for me, it is 100% one-on-one coffee shop.
Oh, yeah?
Like, I am not good at networking. Well, I'm good at it when I have to be,
Mm,
but, like, I don't enjoy it at all.
totally
I
fair.
can't oh my gosh, it drives me insane. I can't do it. I can't do it at all. So I'm gonna rely on you.
Okay,
If we're ever at a
perfect.
Forever at a massive networking event. I'm just going to hang out with you the whole time, and then you can
Amazing.
introduce me to people.
Amazing. And I have to say too that those are so wonderful, and I need to recharge for like at least 24 hours after that. I need a
Oh
recharge
yeah.
after events
Oh
like that.
yeah. I need about 24 years after that. So, and last one, a weekend cabin getaway completely off the grid, or a busy weekend exploring a brand new city.
Mm, I'm probably gonna lean towards off the grid. I do love
Mm-hmm.
sightseeing, but I have to be in
Mm-hmm.
the right headspace for it. And I think I'm also
Yes.
biased right now because I'm about to go to Mexico with my partner, so I'm in the headspace of like,
Ooh,
let's
very
disconnect.
nice. Nice. What part of
Yeah,
Mexico are you going to?
we're going to Cancun.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I went to
Yeah.
Cancun a couple years ago, and I went to Tulum, which
Oh,
was so
nice.
much fun. Tulum was a lot of fun because originally the plan on the Tulum trip was to go to Cancun. My family and I were like, let's go to Tulum because it's kind of like this up and coming Cancun-esque type of area.
Yeah.
And I had a very, very, very good time. Nice. Is it your first time in Cancun, or you've been there before?
No, it's our first time. Yeah.
Oh, nice, nice. Have fun.
Yeah. Thank
Have
you.
fun. Yeah. Now I want to go. Now I want to book a trip to
Right.
Cancun. Kirsten, thank you so much, honestly, for hanging out with me today and for
Yeah.
your insight. Like I always can tell when my audience is going to learn something really valuable from someone, and you just have this insight and this knowledge and this education that I know that my audience is going to walk away, hopefully feeling validated, hopefully having some actionable items that they can take away and apply as soon as this ends today. Looking back at our conversation today, for anyone who's listening that wants to read, your work on psychology today, or if they want to book a session, at Mind the Gaps, or just maybe just follow along with your journey, where is the best place for them to find everything?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you so much, Kai, for hosting me. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, of course.
And yeah, and the best place for people to find me would be my website, which is mindthegaps, plural, .co. And on
Hmm.
that page, that has links to everything, like to my
Hmm.
social media, to my writing, to my podcast and community engagement.
I love it. And all of that stuff will be in the show notes of this, my friends. So all you have to do is go and click. I asked my guest the same question to end the show. So I will ask this of you as well. If there's one thing that you want the audience to take away from our talk today, what should that one thing be?
First thing that comes to mind, you are not your emotions. You are consciousness experiencing your emotions. They are not
I
you.
love it.
You are experiencing them.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Kirsten, thank you so much again for hanging out with me, and I'll see you
Thank
in
you.
Mexico.
Yeah, perfect. See you on the beach.
Yeah.
I opened this episode talking about how so many of us are just kind of running, right? You remember that? Convincing ourselves that the pace that we're keeping is ambition, when really for a lot of us it's protection. And Kirsten says something in this episode, this conversation, that I have not been able to shake. She said that that hiding who we are is not in our biology. It is a trauma response. Good Lord. That one definitely hit different for me because I spent years performing a version of myself that felt safe, and I called it working hard. If this conversation moved you, the first thing I want you to do is go find Kirsten online. Her website, everything, social handles, her writing, her booking info, her work, all of that is linked in the show notes. And then do me a small favor and leave a review on whatever platform that you're listening or watching on right now. And follow me at The Vibe with Kai on all of your favorite social media platforms, and head on over to thevibewithkai.com for the neurodivergent blog, the ADHD store, the email list, and everything about subscribing to exclusive content for only $5 a month. With that said, my friends, thank you so much for watching and for listening. As always, much love, good vibes. I'll catch you next time. Bye.